Today we've got a great malicious compliance story that takes place in the 80s. We'll get into that in a bit, but first, you want detail? You'll get detail. Years ago, in the days of 1-inch analog videotape, we had a client whose source material was usually poor quality, often originating on non-broadcast formats. In order to spare his blushes, we used to write Gen Satis, generally satisfactory, on the record reports we enclosed with the edited masters. One day, he complained that one of his advertisements had been rejected by a broadcaster, which had complained about the lack of detail on the record report. He insisted that future record reports included a proper breakdown of all notable anomalies on the tapes. You want detail? You'll get detail. I noted every instance of poor quality source and picture fault. A 30-second commercial ended up with me having to attach a sheet of A4 to the record report to cover them all. I put it in the box, which I gave to him. He must have sent it to the broadcaster unopened, as it was instantly rejected. Gen Satis was again acceptable for future reports. So, it worked out for OP. They could just write Gen Satis on it and ship it out. But a question I have is OP basically saying, this guy's got so many issues, I don't want to actually have to do all the work of noting all this stuff down. I just want to write a check mark on it and ship it out? Is it really sparing his blushes, or is it just not wanting to be actually critical of the work you're doing? Also, hi, I'm Steven, and if you guys enjoy crazy malicious compliance stories, why not hit those like or subscribe buttons down below? Our next story is The Weekend Guy. Back in the 1970s, I was working in an automotive transmission factory as an inspector. The part I was checking had to be very straight. If it wasn't straight, it could be straightened. But if it went onto the heat treat, the next process after my inspection, it couldn't be bent straight. It had to be scrapped. I was able to check around 400 pieces each night, sometimes more, sometimes less. A lot depended on the percentage bent pieces in each lot. The guy on day shift was getting similar numbers. This was fine for a couple of months, until someone worked a Saturday overtime shift at my station. At the start of my shift the following Monday evening, my foreman informed me that the weekend guy had checked 700 pieces. And he expected me to check 700 that night. I tried to explain that the only way to check 700 pieces would cause a lot of bad parts to get through. Do whatever you have to do, I want you to check 700 pieces tonight, was the advice I was given. When I got to my workstation, I saw that the weekend guy had indeed checked 700 parts. Exactly 700 parts with exactly 400 good parts and exactly 300 rejected, needing to be straightened. No way those numbers represented accurate measurements. Normally, I'd only have 40 or 50 pieces out of 400 needing straightening. These were fake numbers, although there were 300 pieces ready to be straightened, so I assumed that the 400 had indeed gone to heat treat. But I followed the procedure I had explained to the foreman, still trying to be as accurate as possible. I checked something like 650 parts with around 200 pieces in the re-operate racks. Tuesday night, the foreman stopped me and told me to go back to the way I'd been checking previously. Apparently, between the weekend guy's 400 good pieces, my good pieces from Monday evening, there were a lot of scrap pieces coming out of heat treat. Not only should it have been a little bit more obvious to look a little further into how somebody did 300 pieces more than the average of what both other workers were doing all that time, did the foreman willingly choose to ignore the fact that the weekend guy worked overtime to do that? I would say, I guess that's kind of like the Amazon level crunch you experience these days. You know, do the work of 3 men by 1 person in 1 shift. But OP said in the very first sentence, this took place in the 1970s. This next story is, needed a couple of sick days. Small malicious compliance with a bonus story about my doctor. Back in early 2020, I was working a job in a daycare/preschool. Miserable work, honestly. I've long since left. To be honest, teaching wasn't for me. But this location, long hours, always frantically busy. Kids walked all over me, 10 minutes to an hour for lunch depending on the day, and chaotic. I'm usually pretty stoic, but there were a number of days where I would cry in my car at the end of the day. In my year there, I watched around 12 to 15 people leave. 1 fired, 1 retired, and all the rest quit. Massive turnover rate. Now, at the point of the compliance, I'd almost been there a year. After a professional dev day with teachers from sister schools, I woke up and felt a little extra tired. Almost checked my temp just in case, but didn't feel sick yet. Drove my 40-minute commute, and by the time I got there, I was exhausted, just completely sapped. But because it's a school, there are legal staff requirements, and we were constantly understaffed, so I felt like I had to try. Maybe 30 minutes in, a student asked me to read a story to them, and my response, so tired, was to say, "I can't, but you could read it to me," as I put my head down on the desk. My co-teacher finally called up the office to make them call someone else in, and I was able to leave and rest. Wasn't better the next day either though, so my boss made me get a doctor's note. I was obviously sick. She had seen me exhausted, but sure, fine, I'll go. After the doctor checked my blood pressure and temp, I explained the symptoms and was told I either had the flu or mono. Literally did not run a single test, so I doubted this, and then they said that I should stay home for 2 weeks. I was texting my dad about it afterwards because it was weird they didn't test when my boss called to see if I had gotten a note yet. Barely out of the appointment, you'd think she could have waited for me to call, but whatever. Told her they gave me 2 weeks, and she sounded ticked about it. But I was a good bean who didn't want to make my coworkers' lives heck for 2 weeks though, so I went to get a second opinion and got it down to a week. Probably would have been ready by day 3, but freak, I had an excuse for a week and that felt pretty reasonable to me, so I was gonna use it. Bonus story, now I hadn't been to my doc in a while, don't get sick often, but I vaguely remembered that my dad had stopped seeing him for some reason. Turns out that was because he had gone homeopathic, no longer licensed to practice medicine, hence them not running any tests and just guessing. After the diagnosis, they prescribed me 3 ounces of hydroxyl silver. Might be misremembering the name, something similar, but basically it's water that may have touched water that may have touched water that may have touched silver at some point, and sold it to me right there in the office for $127 or so. Freaking ridiculous on its own, but here's the fun bit. They gave me a list of how to use it. You could put it in your nose, like they told me to do, but you could also put it in your ears, your eyes, your water, and you could also take 3 ounces. Again, that was $127, and hold all 3 ounces 3 times a day for 20 minutes in your lady parts, apparently. I'm not sure whose anatomy lets them hold liquid like that, but if you needed a clue that this was ineffective nonsense, that was it. Never found out what my sickness was even after the second opinion, but since they didn't know what it was and it was late January 2020, I'm going with COVID. Coworkers and students alike were calling out sick for weeks, so it was something we didn't have immunity to, for sure. I want to clarify, I don't know much about homeopathic medicine, but either OP got prescribed that silver thing that I've never heard of, or it was colloidal silver, which if anybody has ever seen was what turned that one guy gray or blue. There was this guy who every single day he would drink some colloidal silver and rub it all over his skin, and he literally turned blue-gray. Gopi Balava commented, "I had a coworker who showed me a homeopathic medicine he'd gotten. He was embarrassed that he'd been duped and was showing me for a laugh. It was a weight loss medicine. You put a couple drops under your tongue. The instructions also said to only have, I think, tuna salad for breakfast and lunch. Sure, mostly skip 2 meals a day and you'll lose weight with or without the drops." Speculatrix commented, "Many weight loss diets work because you pay close attention to what you're consuming. Just keep a food diary, be honest and write everything down, but continue to eat a balanced diet. You'll soon be cutting back on things that add weight without useful nutrition or aren't worth staying fat for." Our next story is another "you don't sound sick to me." See a few people's calling in sick stories, and this reminded me of a malicious compliance from my team. Many years ago now, but the gist is here. When I was managing a retail team, I had a call from one of my team while I was in an early meeting with the company owner. I answered it and put it on speaker, just habit. I said, "Hi Danny, what's up?" Danny replied, "Hey boss, not feeling well so won't make it in today." Now, Danny sounds as chipper as can be, no croakiness or fatigue in his voice. I tell him, "No worries, thanks for the notice, rest up. If you don't think you'll make it into work tomorrow, make sure you get a sick note clearing you for work if you can. You're clear on the policy, right?" Danny replied, "Will do, hopefully see you tomorrow, bye." Hang up the phone and go to resume the meeting, and boss starts grilling me. He didn't sound sick. What's even wrong with him? Your team mustn't respect you, blah blah blah. Now, while Danny wasn't our best worker, he was up there and the team and customers loved him. And him calling in sick was rare, and honestly my feelings were a bit hurt by him telling me they didn't respect me. I wasn't long in that position, but I worked my way up there and they all knew that. Proceed to a debate that my team stats were brilliant per what we were meeting about, that I disagree about them not respecting me because he didn't feel the need to put on a voice, and the reality was that what was the matter was irrelevant. He's calling in sick. He's sick. He had never given me a reason not to trust him. I thought that was the end of it. Not quite. Next day, Danny comes in and the boss immediately calls him and I into his office. He starts giving Danny the talk, commitment to the company. Sick days are for when you're sick and unable to work, and how he didn't sound sick. Danny started grinning and just pulls up his sleeve showing a very recently bandaged arm saying, "I'm not sure how I should sound to convey this over the phone. Should I have coughed? How many stitches does it take to give me a croaky voice?" I burst out laughing. Boss, to his credit, took it in stride. He was usually a pretty good guy. Danny obviously told the team about it too. Now, whenever any of the team happened to call in sick when they knew I had a meeting with the owner, it went like this. Becky calls, coughing and spluttering. "Sorry, boss," coughs again. "Won't make it in today." Another fit of coughing. "Child has gastro, so need to take the day off to take care of him." Coughing continues. Mitch calls, very croaky voice. "Can't make it in, twisted my ankle and need to stay off it for a few days." Bell calls, coughing, spluttering, fatigued voice. "Not sure I'll make it in today. Can I take Toil to arrange repairs today?" Cue the next staff, all hands, usually beers and a barbecue in the car park and talking upcoming changes for the next quarter. Whereas part of that, owner gives out a best acting award and also asks them to cut it out. I've worked there for quite a few years. I know the owner personally before I started working there, just had some bad staff and managers in the past, and definitely needed more coffee that morning. I'm just checking here, but isn't it illegal in America at least to demand or pry as to why you're calling out sick? I mean, OP can talk about having a bad day all they want, but when you're actually just violating the rights of your workers, I feel like it goes just at least slightly past bad day material. Presumed DOA commented, "This is why I'm so happy they made this illegal where I'm at several years ago. In high school, I got accused by my boss of skipping work to go to a concert when I really just wanted to sleep off being sick so I could go into work the next day. Now though, it's essentially illegal to ask anything for just one single sick day. My boss just has to accept it and say something like, 'Sorry, hope you feel better.' Something like 3 days or more, they can still require a doctor's note though." Guilty Objective 4602 commented, "In college, I came down with something like the flu in the middle of the first week of class for that semester. I'd been up twice throwing up in the middle of the night. I had a calculus TA with a zero tolerance policy for accepting late homework unless you had a doctor's note. The campus clinic couldn't get me in for an appointment until a time that overlapped with another class the next afternoon. Not wanting to have to miss another class if I felt better the next day in order to get a note for missing calculus the previous day, I opted to try and drag myself to class so I didn't have to take a zero on my homework. 5 minutes into class, I passed out. When I came to and they sat me back upright while they waited for the campus paramedics to arrive, I started to get nauseous and pass out a second time, so I stumbled down the hall to the nearest bathroom where I proceeded to puke again and barely stay conscious. The campus paramedics gave me a nice ambulance ride straight to the campus clinic, where I was now suddenly able to be seen immediately, and I got the doctor's note I had needed. When I returned to calculus a few days later, the TA asked why I tried to come to class if I felt that sick. Our next story is, alright, game on. As a military officer, it was required to apply to retire 12 months out from your retirement date. I was in what I would call a mid-level manager job. I had about 40 employees and we had a $500 million annual budget for our program. My team was really great with very professional and competent people and rarely any issues. We performed really well. They would come to me with their issues and over time, I saw patterns and we would fix them. For instance, one issue we solved saved the organization $64 million over a 4-year period. We had a lot of other smaller wins, a few million here or there, but that was a biggie. My boss, who was bucking for general, was a jerk. For lots of reasons, but just a sour and unhappy person. About 7 months from my retirement in the following spring, we decided to move my spouse and kids to my hometown to be able to start the new school year. We had a house and just needed to move and get set up. I asked for 3 weeks and the boss would only give me 2 weeks. That only gave us a week and a half to get my family settled after the 4-day drive with kids, animals, etc., plus the furniture and everything to arrive just 2 days before I had to be on the plane back. So I was salty. Game on. I was prior enlisted and knew how to play the game by the book. It's important to note that I only missed about 10 days of work in 23 years due to illness. 2 things happened. No more multi-million-dollar savings ideas that made the boss look good came out of my office, and it was time for me to take care of stuff I neglected over the years. In regular meetings, when asked where the next savings was going to come from, it was always crickets. I knew I needed surgery for an injury I had and some other medical issues I'd been neglecting due to work and just life. I planned to take care of all of that post-retirement as it would give me time to recover and figure out what I would do for a living because we couldn't survive on just retirement. Since my boss wouldn't let me get my family settled, it was time to take care of all my medical issues. I made medical appointments to get checked out for all my issues. I had 2 procedures that had me out of work for a week each. But the cherry on top was I got surgery the day before Thanksgiving and the doctor had me on convalescent leave for 4 weeks. When you're on leave like that, you have to have a form signed by your boss and it indicates the address where you will be taking that time to recover. Of course, I used my hometown address so my wife could help me recover. Boss was ticked and tried to deny the leave. It went to our version of HR and they said he had to allow it. That made him even more ticked. In the end, I got to spend the holidays with my family across the country and only had about 3 weeks left on the job before taking my terminal leave. That he could not deny when I returned. I didn't want a ceremony or anything. I just rode off into the sunset. You know, I've always enjoyed the people who talk about how they make sure that they use the bathroom on company time. OP out here has the tenure to be repairing themselves on company time. Isn't it such a sad thing though that it's not an uncommon occurrence that people will continue to delay surgeries that they need until after they retire because there's just no system set up to support that really? Our next story is, you don't sound sick to me. I'm not an American. I used to work as a researcher in an inbound call center. I loved the work and the company was fantastic when I started. But after 4 years, they got bought out by a big international corp. A pretty standard hack and slash corp. Buy a profitable company, strip it of all its assets, cut costs, slash quality, make good money until our well-deserved fantastic reputation is destroyed, then sell off and move on. Within weeks, the company went from being fantastic to work for to just yet another crappy, tense work environment where the bosses take advantage of the employees. One quick example of how badly they nerfed the bonus structure. One particular bonus went from being able to earn up to $1,000 extra in 3 days to a single $50 Boston Pizza gift card. Previously, all employees got paid varying bonuses under this scheme, but in the new system, only one person gets the gift card. And they had the nerve to get mad at us when the new slap in the face bonus failed to motivate anyone. I was good at my job and, not to brag, but I was the most productive employee on the floor. We were given 15 PTO, paid time off days to use every year, which according to our employment contracts and company handbook were to be used for sick days, mental health days, and other personal reasons. No explanation was ever asked for. Use them as and when you will. I always made sure to use up all my PTO by the end of the year as it didn't bank. Previous management encouraged us to do so, and also there was no bonus for not using it. I followed the company rules, always gave plenty of notice, and only once left the team dangling with no notice, as I got seriously ill that time. The new management takes over, and right away they start trying to intimidate us into not taking PTO. I hear a lot of this from my fellow employees. How when they call in, the supervisors have started grilling them, challenging them, saying they don't sound sick, etc. A lot of intimidation and bullying. So by the time I need to use a PTO day, I'm ready. I call in one day and tell them that I won't be in tomorrow. They want to know why. So I tell them that I'm not feeling well. Their voice grows immediately cold and they get a rude tone. You don't sound sick to me. Being a smart butt, I said, not even doctors try to diagnose illnesses over the phone, but they keep trying to push me. Can you come in the afternoon? You don't sound sick. You've been using a lot of sick days, way more than other employees. I got tired of being treated like a criminal for obeying the rules, so I got a recording app for my phone. I live in a one-party consent area, so it's perfectly legal to record phone calls. Next time I felt sick, I called into work. Now, they always began every call with a disclaimer. Thank you for calling so-and-so. For your information, this call may be monitored or recorded for quality purposes. I say hello, give them my name, and say, by the way, just so you know on my end, this call may be monitored or recorded for quality purposes. Because I am recording the call and I think it's only fair to let them know. The supervisor gives a perfunctory laugh and then says, so why are you calling in sick? You don't sound sick to me. I'll put you down as sick for the morning, but you'll be in for the afternoon. I inform them that no, I am calling in for at least one day and will update if I don't feel better. She says, no, I'll put you down for half a day. You can call in again if you don't feel better. Once again, I say no, restate my position, and tell them that is that. She gets really upset and starts insinuating that this might cause me to lose my job. Why do you take so much more PTO than the other employees? I take what my employment contract says I'm entitled to, no more, no less. Well, you should have a better team spirit. We'll have to review this with HR. Threatening tone, classical bullying playbook. I'm off the next day, come in for my following shift. They say, go see HR. I sit down at Art's desk in HR. He's very much a corporate HR lapdog. He starts going on about how they're going to have to review my employment contract and consider whether or not going forward I am a good fit at so-and-so corp. Now, in case I seem too calm in this scenario, bear in mind that while I do prefer to remain at this company for the time being, I don't care if they want to fire me. I am very good at my job. I've had several job offers from competing companies, so the threat of being fired does not faze me. While Art is berating me, I take out my phone and start playing the recording I made when calling in sick. Art stops, starts to get annoyed, and then realizes he's listening to a recording of an employee verbally berating and intimidating a worker for exercising their contractual legal rights. He excuses himself and is gone for about 10 minutes before returning, visibly angry but restrained. He tried to dress me down, scare me, intimidate me into thinking I had violated the law with an illegal recording. I told that, working as I did as a professional researcher, I had, to no surprise, done my research, and single-party consent is all that was required. He shifted gears, started saying the recording didn't count because the supervisor thought I was joking. I wasn't, I replied. Art says, but she thought you were. I reply, and she was wrong, so it doesn't really matter what she thought, Art. I told her the truth. She made a mistake, and recording my own phone conversations is 100% legal and admissible. Art leaves and returns a few minutes later, ever more red-faced. You can go back to your desk. I did as instructed, and that was all I ever heard again about using my PTO. Whenever I called in from then on, they were always very precise and professional. Their tone was as cold as a politician's promise, but that was a lot better than the bullying from before. I think all you need to know about this company is summed up in the fact that Art was literally blindsided by hearing the recording and realizing, oh crap, we're actually violating the law here. Not only that though, Art being absolutely frustrated and upset that they can't punish OP somehow here. Meat Slinger commented, one time at an old job, I got given the, you don't sound sick, and you're the only one on. I'll expect you for your shift or it'll be straight to the final written warning for not coming in bullcrap. I had some pretty aggressive gastroenteritis, which of course wouldn't make me sound sick because it doesn't have respiratory symptoms. So I dragged myself into the retail store where I worked and proceeded to spend the next 3 hours and, I'll be quite blunt, puking and crapping my guts out. The one employee bathroom was an absolute disaster and it was literally making that corner of the store smell. I maybe got 30 minutes of time actually at the till cumulatively. Customers were mad. We had a few things stolen because I couldn't be at the counter to watch the store. Finally, after all that, the next person came in for their shift and I went home, figuring I'd left a decent enough impression of my illness. Boss tried to have me fired for the thefts and not being at the till, which meant official paperwork to process the disciplinary action. When corporate found out about the whole thing, my manager must have been absolutely reamed for it. They didn't get fired outright, but they did get transferred to the crappiest store in the city, apart from ours that day, where careers are basically sent to die. Our next story is drillers will only drill. So back in the late 80s, I started as a driller helper at an engineering firm, small but very family-like, not part of any corporation. I learned the ropes, and when one of the drillers quit, I was tested on all the rigs. We had 3 main, B-53, B-50, and a B-40 Unimog. These are all-terrain carriers for soil exploration and monitoring well drilling. I passed all testing and was promoted to driller. Drillers were guaranteed 40 hours a week. If not on the drill, we got paid to sit around. That got old real fast for me, so I started doing some tech work. Breaking concrete test cylinders, the hanging out in the lab learning and doing laboratory work, sieve studies, hydrometer studies, elasticity tests on soil, even started writing with and doing tech work. Would also run plans around to different dot offices and such. This went well until the owner decided to retire and sell the business. Next thing you know, a management firm was buying us and called their first company meeting to lay out their expectations. First thing they took away was the driller guaranteed 40 hours. If you didn't have a drilling job, you waited at home till you did. No work, no pay. Well, they went around with all the department heads and discussed individually. After that, they asked for questions. And every department asked, "What about OP?" The new managers answered, "What about him?" And every department head lists all the things I was helping with. I was really kind of surprised because I was just doing these things to stay busy and make the day go faster. Well, these managers flat out said OP is a driller. That's what he was hired for. That's all we want him to do. Well, that did not sit well with any of the departments, and the meeting started to get a bit rowdy, and the other drillers grabbed me and did the hasty exit. We left and went to our local watering hole. We had a few barley pops and quite a few laughs. After a couple of hours, most of the others came by and were really disgusted with this new management. We then went home. I got a call to come in for a drilling job 3 weeks after I received my last full check. I already had another job and the other drillers had also. They were surprised none of us were willing to just sit and wait. I visited the new office a few months later and found out they had to outsource all the drilling, sell off the drills, and hire 4 more people to fill positions that I had been working. Oh, the stories they shared during my visit. Steep learning curve. And I guess maybe not really malicious compliance, but a whole lot of karma delivered. It's not a shock at all what happened here. I mean, they came into this place and they basically said, "Yeah, you know that stable, very well-paying job all of you just had? We're gonna try to move you all to extremely part-time status. And it's also going to be unreliable and on-call only, so make sure you keep your head up for when we might call you in to maybe get paid. I'd be looking for employment elsewhere too." Our next story is Little Brother Listens. This happened years ago with my 2 oldest children, but to this day still makes me giggle anytime I think about it. My daughter was 9 at the time and was going through some phase where she was just plain mean. Yes, there were consequences and it didn't last long, thank goodness. Her little brother was about 4.5, and she had recently began relentlessly yelling at him and bullying him. He was the most tender-hearted kid and it broke my heart. One day, I heard him snap at her, "You're mean. I'm gonna make you stop." She said, "No, you can't. Try me." For added context, after this happened, I told him I heard what he had said, and I was proud of him for standing up for himself. He swore up and down he would make her stop. I didn't think to ask his master plan. I just told him we never get physical and that we don't hurt people when we are mad. He just grinned, said okay, and walked away. Fast forward to that night, I told them to go get their pajamas on when I heard a scream from my daughter's room that I've only heard in horror movies. I ran back to my daughter's room with her nonstop shrieking and my son standing in the corner grinning ear to ear. I asked what was going on, and then I saw it. A giant pile of poo on her pillow. He looked her dead in the eyes and said, "You said try me. I betcha you won't be mean to me no more." "Mommy, I didn't hurt her, just like you said." I couldn't even attempt to discipline because I was trying to hold back laughter. It worked. She became much nicer to him. They're now 17 and 12, and to this day, if she gets sassy with him, all he has to do is say, "Don't make me get your pillow," and then they both start laughing. You know, growing up, me and my siblings definitely fought. I remember getting into little actual fist fights from time to time. You know, mostly 4 or 5-year-olds trying to like wail on each other's bodies, but it doesn't really do much damage. Gotta be honest, my sibling poos on my pillow, I'm throwing these 4.5-year-old hands. It is on site, I am using the poo pillow as a new weapon, they are going to get covered with it if I can help it. That would have been my mindset as a 4.5-year-old, it would have gotten messy. Our next story is written up for being nice. This happened years ago when I worked in a distribution center. It was one of those days where they were trying to cram 50 people's work into 25 people, which is typical in these places. I was tired of it and had sick time, so I went to my supervisor before lunch break and said, "Hey, I'm gonna leave after lunch." We usually told him when we were going to do this so that over our lunch, he has time to move people around and cover the empty work slot. Well, I was on a crap list with a person in upper management, and they wanted to use this to burn me. They called me into the office the next day and said, "You told him you were going to leave well before you left? How did you know ahead of time you would be sick after lunch? Sick time is for being sick only, so if you use it without being sick, you are stealing company time." And that's what they wrote me up for. So if I would have lied and said I feel sick, I'm going home immediately, I wouldn't be in trouble, I asked? To which they actually replied, yes. Cue malicious compliance. I told everyone at work, 150 plus people, that if you notify that you are leaving ahead of time, you will get written up for time theft. No one ever did it again. From that point on, it was, "I don't feel good, I'm going home," from anyone who wanted to, meaning their job position went unmanned for the 30 minutes it takes to restructure and reassign job tasks. Meaning every day, 2 to 3 times a day, they would have to take someone from another job and put them in a backed up mess, which led to more call-offs. It got so bad that the upper management started an intimidation campaign in which they would start saying things like, "I'm starting to see a pattern" whenever people left early more than once in a year. I now have a job that is a million times better, but thought that I would share this here. Don't hate the player, hate the company's sick leave policy. If they hate it so much, change it. Unless, you know, they legally can't. In which case, I'm feeling kinda sick now. Slybat9 commented, "Some years ago when I worked at the Golden Arches, I worked at the front, which was only a few feet away from the massive drive-through window. I get sick fairly easily, and with the combination of that giant window being open almost that whole time due to how many customers were coming through, the uniforms being t-shirts, and it being late at night and close to winter so it was very cold outside, I could feel my throat start to hurt before my shift even ended that night. I got off at like 10 p.m. and was scheduled to start at 6 a.m. the next morning, so when I got home I called in saying that I wouldn't be able to make it to my shift. The manager who answered didn't seem to like me very much and complained that I was calling in too early and told me to come in with a doctor's note. I couldn't find a place that would be open in time before my next shift. It was a fairly far drive both ways and could take up to an hour for travel, so I just went to bed and woke up at like 2 a.m. the next morning feeling like I had to throw up and barely being able to speak above a whisper. I was told that we're supposed to call about 3 hours before our shift if we can't make it. But I just called immediately saying there's no way I could make it into my shift. Luckily, some other guy answered and he realized that if I could barely talk, then there's no way I could properly do my job. I slept in and went with my mom to see some doctor and got some medicine prescribed, and by the time I got home from my shift, the day would have been over. My next scheduled shift was a few days later, and by then I was feeling a lot better, so I went and gave my doctor's note to the manager working that day and explained how often I would need to take my medication. I also made sure to change my availability not long after this so I would be able to have more time to rest at home between shifts and wouldn't have to worry about staying late and coming in early the next morning anymore. Our next story is, I'm using too much of my PTO? I work at a massive company in corporate. Great place, but unfortunately was stuck under a micromanaging director who had random neurotic episodes. Our team was always burnt out because if Mr. Director saw you leave your desk for any reason, like to go to the bathroom, get water, or take a lunch break, he took that as you not being busy enough and would pile on even more useless work. And if you left a minute before 5:05, he got really upset. Oh, and forget about working from home. Everyone else did. Finally, the time came for the big international trip I'd been planning for years that was now possible after COVID. I hardly took time off and slaved away the whole year while my friends on other teams enjoyed life. We were more pressured this year to always be working and not take time off. We had so much work, we couldn't even take time off. I ensured everything is wrapped up first, plus it's December, so most people are out anyway, take my week-and-a-half trip, and had an amazing time. Fast forward a month, and my manager, who reports to Mr. Director, tells me that I need to watch out and not take so much vacation. He states matter-of-factly that I need to be more careful about using my days, and I've actually run out of time to take off. What? We're checking vacation days? I was shocked as we were repeatedly told that we should not log our days in the system because they aren't checking. It's an honor system, and nobody cares about how many days you take if it's reasonable. I ask, what should I do differently? I always check well in advance and add it on your calendar. Should I start logging my days in the system? How's that even possible if I have at least a week left? I keep track myself. He won't give me a straight answer and is super vague. Okay, since we're now tracking vacation days, I'll make sure I log everything in the system. I went in and backlogged all the days I'd ever taken off prior years. Weeks upon weeks of PTO, even needed HR approval since some were so long ago. Manager had to go in and approve every single request since it notifies you and requires you to respond. Going forward, I submitted everything, and yes, I had plenty of PTO left. Manager starts getting annoyed, says that I really don't need to log time off. I stop him right there. But I thought I was taking too much vacation. We all need to be sure that we're being truthful about the honor system. He doesn't know what to say. Later, a teammate tells me what really went down. Turns out one day, Mr. Director decided that his team was taking too much time off, that all the useless work he assigned was not getting done. He had one of his tantrums and started freaking out and tracked down every day off, doctor's appointments, sick day, etc. that our team of 8 people had taken going back at least a year. He was checking calendars, digging up emails, asking other people if they saw us this day or that, even though he had told us time and time again, you don't need to log your days, we're not checking. But because Mr. Director was a B-cluster narcissist, he was much too busy and important to take up his concerns with us lowly employees directly, or to talk things through like an adult and get all the facts first, but not too busy to account for every hour I wasn't at work. This would be one of many infractions that came out of nowhere. Mr. Director was also an extremely difficult person to work with. Other teams didn't want to work with our team. He treated people poorly, and I can't tell you how many people flat out hated him. And guess what? Nobody had used anywhere near all their PTO. There were 0 performance concerns, and we were an extremely high-performing team due to the constant fear of setting him off. I always asked for feedback and got nothing. Yet, coworkers with planned family trips were getting pressured into pushing them back again and again and again because Mr. Director needed them there sitting at their desk in case something important came up. Meanwhile, Mr. Director made sure to use more than his allotted PTO days and frequently took week-long trips. I made sure to use the rest of my PTO days since they were now being tracked. Mr. Director actually tried to stop it, but I threatened to take it up with HR since I had plenty of time left, and he backed off. Thankfully, I escaped that team and moved internally. I was doing so much work, much of it technical for a non-technical team, that nobody knew how to do it. Mr. Director was frantically reaching out to me and demanding me to fix stuff. Even though I spent my last 2 weeks documenting and transitioning over everything, I chose to ignore him, and it felt great. My old teammates still there are miserable. The people that replaced us are already trying to leave. One guy who had been with the company for years completely left the company a month after joining this team when realizing his mistake. I don't blame OP for being upset, especially when a manager comes down and, does the whole micromanager thing. That said, I feel like OP has to acknowledge that something as nice as we don't actually keep track of any PTO limits is a policy that almost inevitably at some point is going to be stopped. That's one of those yeah man, I'm gonna start up my own company and it's gonna be so awesome and all my friends are gonna be there. We're not gonna keep track of any PTO, we're not gonna be super anal about things, we're not gonna micromanage. And then Charlie all of a sudden starts taking a week off here, a week off there. It is one of those policies that is perfect to be that one thing that one jerk is going to ruin for everybody. Battle Puppy commented, Sorry, I'm confused. You weren't logging because they don't check. I'm assuming it's an endless PTO company, PTO taken, no limit. Yet you were told you only have 5 days of PTO left. How do they know one way or another if no one logs or checks? Drybowler2837 replied, I think employees just track it themselves and it's expected that they're honest. So OP knew that they had 5 days left, but it wasn't recorded on the company calendar. This next story is, of course I'll email your team. Many years back, I was working in an office for a company in one of their satellite sites. In general, for your day-to-day, you only needed to use one system as it did everything that you technically needed. But it didn't do everything you actually needed. Now, I was an older employee and was there before the new shiny bespoke software got rolled out, which meant that I had login details for the old system, which was still the backbone of half of our head office work and fed into what we saw. This was really useful as it meant that I could log in and access loads of information that we actually needed. Information that some faceless exec had decided to exclude from the new system. So, for the next 3 or 4 years, I would log in every couple of days and download a report or two, giving us buying reports, stocking issues, and more that I could then share with the rest of our site. It wasn't confidential information, and while we could do without it, it definitely made life easier having it. Think of it as the difference between getting a drink in the middle of the night with the lights off. But it's a dang sight easier with the lights on. Anyway, we'd never had an issue and no one had complained until one day one of the department managers found out I was downloading reports from a system that she was adamant that only her team needed to use, and she contacted IT and had them revoke my access. And annoyingly, she did so without letting me know, which meant when I logged in the next time, well, I didn't and just got an error message. Locally, we had no idea what had happened. So a quick email to IT and got told that Karen had my access blocked. So then it's a quick email to Karen to find out why, and all I got was a short and curt, you don't need access. If you need to know something, you ask my team. I figure there's 2 reasons for this. 1, she's being a power-hungry pain in the butt that likes to control people, and 2 is she'd been trying to expand her team, and I guess if you make 20 satellite stores run through her, then you create the workload you need to take on 2 or 3 more people so you can give your best friend flexible working hours. Allegedly. Oh, 3 reasons actually. She really hated me after I called her out once and humiliated her in front of the company's directors, to which she lodged a complaint to HR demanding I be fired, only for the CEO to tell them to withdraw it as I hadn't done anything wrong after I named him as a witness to the event. So, malicious compliance time. Those reports I downloaded, granted it was only 2 or 3 reports and only 2 or 3 times a week, which doesn't seem like a big amount, but those reports helped resolve 50 plus complaints and inquiries per day. So now I guess we have to email her team each time. I told the rest of my team to run every query through me and I would email her team. 1, because I didn't want anyone else to get in trouble as I knew this was going to make her explode. 2, because I could field the queries to make sure each one was unique as we did get duplicate info requests. And if they've already told me once, I don't want to upset them by making them tell me twice. And thirdly, because I'm a jerk. I wanted her to know it was me. She managed a week. By day 3, she had contacted my manager to complain, and by day 5, because I hadn't stopped, we still needed questions answered, she had a meeting with HR and I got a cease and desist request, asking if I could send a single email at the end of each day with all the queries in it. It turns out if you email 6 people up to 50 emails a day, at some point someone misses an important invoice and a whole shipment gets delayed, or worse, gets cancelled. The upside, within a couple of months, her team was restructured, with different members given regional coverage. Turns out the reason her team looked so busy is because they would count one job done by one person as being 6 jobs, 1 for each person because they were all included in the same emails. Turns out you don't need a bigger team if you're honest about the work they do. And secondly, the reports I downloaded, each person in her team now has to download themselves twice a week and send them out to the stores in their region. The other stores had just decided that now that they couldn't find out, there was no reason to know, and answered queries with, I don't know, for years. So we accidentally made their services better too. So, I mean, it inevitably failed, but I gotta be honest, I have at least a little bit of respect for this lady. She did her best to consolidate as much power and seeming importance as possible. Couldn't quite pull off the full Palpatine I am the Senate turn, but it sure sounds like she got pretty close to entrenching herself before she got caught with her 6-person blunder. Our next story is, if I'm not a full-time employee, I went to a for-profit film/photography school and was a student worker, PT, in the equipment checkout. Think camera, audio, lighting, etc. rental department. My primary job was repairing damaged equipment, and I was good at it. One of the best managers I've ever had knew I was about to drop out of school in my last year because I couldn't afford it anymore, so she offered me a promotion to full-time, which would allow me to take my final 6 classes at no cost, though I would be working full-time. When she approved my promotion, which included my pay rate doubling, I started working full-time. After a few days, she left for a 3-week cruise, a family vacation she'd been preparing over a year for. With her on PTO, we're now only 2 full-time employees in the department. The rest were part-time student workers, and none of them did repair work. I'd been working full-time for 2 weeks, and she had been on PTO for 1 when paychecks came out. Mine was half of what I was expecting. They had not raised my pay rate. I went to HR on my lunch break to dispute and discuss, and HR was next to useless. I'm sorry, but your promotion has not been approved yet. These things take time. It might go through at the end of the month, 2 more weeks. This is not personal, it's just the regulations. I didn't get mad, I didn't yell, I simply told the HR that I needed to think about it. So I walked around the rest of my break and thought, cue malicious compliance. After that, I went back to HR and told them this. For the past 2 weeks, I've been working full-time and repairing equipment at the level of a trained technician. As you have stated, my full-time position is not yet authorized, and as such, I can only work a maximum of 24 hours per week. It's Wednesday afternoon, and I've maxed out my hours for the week. I'll be going home now. I have a dog to walk and a pool to swim in. I was house-sitting for my manager. Did I say that she was awesome? I'm not quitting. I'll be back for my regular shift next Monday, and I'll be working 24 hours a week at the level of a student worker. I'm sure the pile of broken gear will still be there waiting for me. Please understand, there is nothing personal about this. I'm simply following the employee regulations. At that point, I left campus and drove to the house, walked the dog, and had a swim. Just before 5 p.m., I got a call. Matt, can you come in tomorrow morning at 8 a.m.? We have some papers for you to fill out to finalize your promotion. Long story short, HR/payroll refused to put through a promotion to full-time that my manager had approved. I refused to work full-time until my promotion was approved. My manager loved hearing it from HR when she got back. Edit, seems like a common question is, did I get the back pay? Sadly, the answer is no, because the official promotion paperwork, contracts, employee handbook, etc. had not been finalized and approved. But I did end up staying there for around 10 more years. You know, almost feels like an extortion play here from the HR. Kind of that, we know it's allowing you to continue taking your classes, but we're gonna pretend to not approve the promotion and continue saving money where possible for as long as we can. I'm sorry, OP, we lost the promotion paperwork. Give us another week or 2, just keep coming in as usual, we'll find the paperwork, don't worry. RedGhost3568 commented, curious if this was HR or payroll being jerks, or someone higher up the ladder thinking they could pull a fast one. Well done, OP. The idiots learned day late, dollar short. Cost of lost productivity from the broken gear was higher than what they owed you. Our next story is, you can't do that work anymore because it's not your trained specialty. When I was in the military, my military occupational specialty, MOS, was power generation equipment repair, or generator mechanic for all the civilians. I was trained on the mostly 5 kilowatt and 10 kilowatt generators, but when I get to my permanent duty station, they only had a few scrawny 1.5 kilowatt and 3 kilowatt generators that we occasionally used in the field. Once our motor pool captain found out that I was computer savvy, he had me in the office doing reports and memos and other computer-related work. After a while, they even sent me away with another sergeant for a week of training to manage a new application to track vehicle repair work in the motor pool. Things were good for a year or so, and then we had a change of leadership in the motor pool, including me losing my immediate boss, the sergeant who had trained with me. The Sergeant First Class, Big Sarge, was known for doing shady stuff, and they wanted me to be comfortable with a lot less accuracy on reporting through the computer system. I didn't feel like being set up to be the scapegoat for the nonsense I knew they were doing. Due to my lack of cooperation, Big Sarge took me away from that work and put me back on generator duty because that's your MOS. Even when we had nothing going on with generators on a regular basis, that's all they had me working on each day. Well, things were fine with the computer stuff for almost 2 months until it came time to do all the end of quarter reporting. And none of those dummies in the new clique had ever been trained on the system. So they fumble around for 2 or 3 days, and then Big Sarge tells me right at the end of a motor pool formation that I need to go and help them run the reports while we're still in formation. I said, "I don't know how to do that, Sergeant." He said, "What do you mean? Of course you do." I replied, "It's not my MOS, Sergeant." He replied, "Drop. Give me 50, soldier." He dismissed everyone else and left me out there until I did the push-ups. He was heated, but he didn't say anything else to me that day. The next day, he called me aside, privately, and asked if I could please help them out. "Sure," I said. He treated me a whole lot better at that point, and I did run the reports they needed. Totally unrelated to this incident, I was transferred to HQ Company about 3 months later, and then all his guys had to report to me for these motor pool reports. That was a whole other barrel of laughs, and Sarge always swore I somehow orchestrated that when I have absolutely zero power, clout, or influence to make any such thing happen. But his boys were unable to get away with anything anymore once I was in charge of consolidating the motor pool reports for the whole battalion. Big Sarge essentially said, "OP, I'm taking you off of this thing and you are to act like you know nothing about this." "Sir, yes sir." Comes full circle. "OP, help me with that thing from earlier." "What thing, sir? I don't know what thing you're talking about." Our next story is, don't want me to start before 8? Fine. Years ago, I worked for this complete psycho at a semi-public service type place. Moody, arrogant. My first week there, she must have mentioned having a PhD, doctorate / I'm a doctor at least half a dozen times. And the biggest darn snob I've ever met. We had flexible work hours, spread of hours between 7 a.m. and 6 p.m., signing on in 15-minute increments. If I had a really good run in traffic, sometimes I'd get in there to sign on at 7:30 or 7:45. Well, Psycho Doctor didn't like that and said I couldn't start before 8 o'clock, despite everyone else in the office being allowed to. I explained that sometimes if the traffic was good, I got in earlier than that, but she wouldn't have it. Told me if I got in early, I could read through my work emails, but I couldn't sign on before 8 o'clock. So basically, she expected me to give 15 to 30 minutes free labor. Yeah, nah, screw that. So if I got in early and the weather was nice, I would sit outside. Or if it wasn't, I would sit at my desk and read my Kindle or play on my phone, and didn't switch my computer on until bang on 8 o'clock. Her boss came by early one morning wanting to collect something she'd left in the office for him, and of course the office wasn't open and she demanded to know where I was. I reminded her that I wasn't allowed to start before 8 o'clock, which I could tell royally ticked her off, but there was nothing she could do about it as I had the email trail to back me up. Small potatoes in terms of malicious compliance, but it made me feel good. So truly, I just don't understand why they would have that policy. Is it like an overtime thing? Like OP signing on 15-30 minutes too early and it's running over 40 hours or something? If that's the case, I could get it if OP is working smack on 40 hours a week or something. Is it just annoying tracking being early 15 to 30 minutes every now and then? Or was it an attempted scam? Our next story is, when do you need this done? Okay, right away it is. Here's a twofer. My boss was the kind that wanted people to jump when he said jump. He was also totally clueless on how to do my job. He really wanted the billing to go out as fast as possible every month because, you know, cash flow. This was the kind of boss that would often say, "What do you mean X?" And I would calmly list the definition of X. I don't think he ever knew what to do with that. So one time at the beginning of the month, I'm working on billing, usually takes 3 days, when he comes into my office and says he needs this report done. I tell him it's going to take a few days and ask him what sort of priority. He says, top priority. Okay, you got it. 3 days later, I turn the report in and he asks me about billing. Well, I had to put it aside to get this report done, but I'm back on it now. You could almost see the steam coming out of his ears. To his credit, he didn't blame me, but you could tell he wanted to. Another time at the end of the year, he makes a special order from one of our suppliers for 6 times our usual order. A month later, when it's time to pay the bill, I told him I haven't seen it. He tells me he gives me all the bills and that it's my fault for losing it. I call the supplier. Turns out the supplier never even put the order in their system. They shipped the product, but because it was such an unusual order, the salesperson forgot about it. Now, although unethical, my boss would love to have never paid this bill, especially how much bigger it was since we ordered so much. I let him know the supplier was grateful for us pointing out the discrepancy. My boss was speechless. A welcome occurrence. I love the optics of the innocence play here. Oh, hey boss, it looks like you missed paying this invoice. Don't worry though, I already reached out and made sure they knew about it. You know, just something that really gets that steam whistle of a head he has rattling. Night Otter commented, I used to juggle various projects. I had a whiteboard listing the current week, project, task, due date, priority, per my manager. You want a task done that's not on a project plan? You negotiate with my boss and other project managers to slide it into my schedule. It wasn't malicious or petty, it kept me from going insane. Our next story is, told me I couldn't get time off to go home for holidays. Fine, I quit. Several years in a row till they couldn't be bothered with the paperwork. Was reminded from a recent post, I worked part-time throughout my studies, UK, on a 0-hour contract at a club/pub/events venue. This was over a decade ago. They didn't let folk have both Christmas and New Year's off. You had to work one of them. I joined and was made supervisor shortly after because I had common sense and figured stuff out quickly. I went home for the holidays, and when that time came the first year, I just said I would quit, and did. There were no issues with finding another almost minimum wage part-time job. Reapplied in January as they were looking for staff. Rehired. Next holidays come around and I tell them the same thing. Same thing all over again. Next year, they just tell me, please don't leave, just take whatever days off and we'll see you again next year. I'm also great friends to this day with my favorite GM from those days, though I went and got a job in my field. I mean, I don't want to be mean to OP's favorite pub or whatever, but either the pub was bad, the boss was bad, or the pay was really bad. Like, how could they have somebody quit multiple times over a period of years and they come begging saying, please just take whatever days off, just continue working for us? Hijinks75 commented, I had a similar story. I worked for a company doing design sales where the owner's sister was HR and she reviewed all the jobs after they were sold. She would get on my case about stupid crap, so I would quit. Like Liam Neeson, I have a fairly unique set of skills. Every time she would get at me about some brain-dead stupid thing, I would quit and walk out. The next day, the owner would call me and offer me more money to come back. Finally, it got to the point where she wasn't allowed to talk to me directly because they had to give me 3 raises in 6 months. Fun stuff. Our next story is, HR said, we can't make exceptions, so I took all my PTO at once. New manager comes in loud, talking about structure and consistency. Suddenly, no work from home, no flex hours, no swapping PTO. I asked to move 2 days, my cousin's wedding. She just goes, sorry, we can't make exceptions to anyone, it wouldn't be fair. Alright then, I put in a request for all 23 of my unused PTO days. Straight through end of quarter, no overlap, no coverage. It got approved in like 10 minutes? Okay. Couple days later, she's in full panic mode. Wait, who's handling your workload? I said, dunno. I assumed you had a plan. No exceptions, right? She had to cover me and deal with fallout. Stuff piled up, clients got upset, 2 people quit. I came back to a new HR memo. Managers can now approve flexible PTO on a case-by-case basis. Turns out, fair looks different when you're the one getting screwed. I mean, it kind of sucks that OP had to be the one to fall on the sword to make a difference for everyone, but is it not a no-brainer to have flexible PTO that is scheduled around when it makes sense for the company and for the workers' lives? DataDude00 commented, I used to work for a major international bank where vacation was set to expire after 22 months. This meant that any vacation earned in 2025 would expire at the end of October 2026. The issue with this, October is fiscal year and usually an all-hands-on-deck situation where a ton of critical reports need to go out to meet regulatory compliance. Anyway, my middle manager job was usually insanely busy, so I rarely took my vacation, and it was always a struggle to get my allotment in during the time before it expired. One year, I had 3 weeks left and it was early October, so I approached my boss and asked if I could book the days now and show up to work for October and then just take the actual days off in November when it was calmer. He said, no exceptions, use it or lose it, thinking I would opt to lose it. I immediately went to the HR system and booked my 3 weeks vacation for the last 3 weeks of October, and it gets approved. On the second day of my vacation, he started emailing me with things like, "We need this report run and verified by end of day," even though I had my out of office set. I'm not a jerk about it, so I took it as a one-off and just ran it and checked it over as it took me about an hour to do, no harm. Then he did that the next morning and evening and the one after that and after that. I emailed him back and copied HR, asking if this meant my vacation days would get refunded or if the company was paying out overtime hours for this work since I was on approved leave. I didn't hear anything for about 48 hours and then got a sheepish, "Enjoy the rest of your vacation, we have this handled" response. Apparently, HR tore an absolute strip out of him for harassing and demanding work from an employee on vacation. When I got back, he said moving forward he would be amenable to some vacation day swaps to make sure we have appropriate coverage at the right times of the year. Edit, I should add HR were kind of jerks, so I don't think they cared all that much that he was asking me to work on my time off. I think they crapped their pants that he was demanding it in writing with a long history and audit trail. But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. Now, if you want to hear another absolutely awesome malicious compliance story, check out that video on the left. Or if you missed my latest video, check out that video on the right. That said, I'll see you all next time with some more stories.